The Museum of Souls was a place of mystery and reverence, perched on a secluded hillside surrounded by dense forest. During the day, the museum attracted tourists fascinated by its vast collection of historical and cultural artifacts. Come nightfall, the place took on a sinister air, as if the objects on display themselves were lurking, waiting to reveal their darkest secret. Arthur Mendez, the museum's curator, was a middle-aged man with graying hair that betrayed more years of concern than age. He had dedicated his life to preserving historical artifacts, believing that each object carried a part of the soul of its possessor. However, Arthur never imagined how literal this belief would become. It all began one winter afternoon when Arthur received a mysterious wooden box with no return address or indication of origin. Upon opening it, he found a collection of antique objects, each more peculiar than the last. A porcelain doll with glass eyes that seemed to follow its movements, a pocket watch that did not work but whose second hand moved every now and then, and a small, worn mirror whose surface reflected something more than just the surrounding environment. Intrigued, Arthur decided to display the new items in a special wing of the museum. But the night after the exhibition opened, he began to have intense nightmares, in which he heard voices whispering dark secrets and felt an oppressive presence watching him. Each night, the nightmares became more vivid, and Arthur began to notice small changes in the artifacts. The doll seemed to shift position, the clock showed different times, and the mirror reflected scenes from an unknown past. Desperate for answers, Arthur began to investigate the origins of the object. He discovered that each had a macabre story associated with it. The doll had belonged to a young woman named Amelia, who had mysteriously disappeared, and the last time she was seen, she was holding the doll. The watch had been a gift from a wealthy man to his wife, who had died under suspicious circumstances shortly after receiving it. As for the mirror, it had been found in the home of a woman accused of witchcraft, who had allegedly used the object in forbidden ritual. Arthur realized that each artifact was linked to a tragic death, and the spirits of the victims seemed to be attached to the objects, seeking justice or revenge. But what disturbed him most was the feeling that the artifacts had not arrived at the museum by chance. It was as if they had been brought to him, as a test or a burden that he would have to bear. As the nights passed, Arthur began to realize that the artifacts were not only trying to communicate with him, but were also affecting his sanity. He heard children laughing at night, felt cold touches on his skin, and saw shadows moving through the museum's corridors. The museum, once a sanctuary of history, had become a prison for lost souls. The first object Arthur decided to investigate further was the pocket watch. He spent days researching and discovered that the watch belonged to an aristocrat named Victor Bellamy, known for his obsession with time. Victor's wife, Helena, had been found dead under strange circumstances, with the watch next to her body, showing exactly midnight. Rumor had it that Victor had made a pact to freeze time, allowing him to live forever, but the price would be his beloved soul. Feeling an urgency to find out more, Arthur traveled to the old Bellamy mansion, now in ruins. There he found Victor's journal, detailing his experiments with time and the curse he had invoked. According to the journal, the only way to break the curse was to destroy the clock in a sacred place where time had no influence. A place known as the Valley of Shadows, a mystical region in the mountains. However, upon returning to the museum, Arthur realized that the clock had disappeared. He frantically searched the halls until he heard the ticking echoing from the main hall. When he reached it, he saw the clock floating in the air, surrounded by a dark mist. A ghostly figure of a woman appeared, with a look of despair. It was Helena, trapped between the world of the living and the dead, crying out for help. Mustering all his courage, Arthur took the clock and promised Helena that he would free her from the curse. However, as he tried to leave the museum, the doors locked and the ticking of the clock grew louder, reverberating in his ears. He ran through the corridors, feeling the weight of time on his shoulders, until he finally found a way out. But as he crossed the museum doors, the clock suddenly stopped, and Helena's figure disappeared, leaving behind only a whisper of gratitude. With the clock destroyed, Arthur felt a brief sense of relief, but he knew there were still other cursed artifacts to contend with. Next on his list was the mirror of the woman accused of witchcraft. The mirror, ancient and tarnished, had an unsettling air, as if it hid secrets deep within its glass. Arthur researched the museum's archives and discovered that the mirror had belonged to a woman named Morgana, who was accused of practicing black magic. According to local legend, Morgana used the mirror to cast curses and control those who looked into it. After her execution, the mirror was broken into several pieces, but one of them was recovered and eventually restored. This was the piece that now resided in the museum. One night, as Arthur was examining the mirror, he saw something that left him paralyzed. The reflection in the mirror was not his own, but that of a woman with eyes as black as night and a malevolent smile. The image seemed to whisper to him, and Arthur, mesmerized, moved closer, until he felt an invisible force pulling him into the mirror. Within the reflection, Arthur was transported to a distorted world, where time and space had no meaning. He was in Morgana's house, but everything was reversed, as if he were trapped on the wrong side of a mirror. Morgana appeared before him, laughing at his misfortune, and revealed that the mirror was a door to a dark realm, where she controlled everything. Arthur knew he had to escape before his mind was consumed by the power of the mirror. He remembered the stories that Morgana feared fire, where it was through flames that she had been executed. Desperately searching for a way out, Arthur found a torch and used it to set the house on fire. Flames reflected in the mirror, beginning to distort reality around him. Morgana screamed in fury and tried to stop him, but Arthur threw the torch at the mirror, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. Back at the museum, Arthur woke up gasping on the floor, surrounded by the shards of the broken mirror. He felt a sense of victory, but also of warning. With each curse broken, he was closer to facing whatever was behind the arrival of the artifact. The last object was the porcelain doll. Ever since it was put on display, Arthur had avoided looking directly at it, as he had always felt an evil presence emanating from it. The doll, with its white dress and glass eyes, seemed almost alive, as if it were waiting for the right moment to act. Arthur discovered that the doll belonged to a girl named Amelia, who had mysteriously disappeared many years before. Amelia's family believed that the doll was cursed, as all the children who had owned it before her had also disappeared or died tragically. There were rumors that the doll contained the soul of a child who had died violently and was seeking revenge. Deciding that he needed to destroy the doll to break the curse, Arthur tried to burn it. The flames mysteriously went out. He tried to break it into pieces, but the doll seemed indestructible. Meanwhile, he began to hear children's laughter at night, and the doll seemed to move around on its own, appearing in different parts of the museum. One night, Arthur woke to the sound of soft footsteps in his room. When he turned on the light, he saw the doll sitting in a chair next to his bed, her eyes fixed on him. Before he could react, he felt a chilling cold on his skin and saw the ghostly figure of a little girl appear beside the doll. Amelia, or what was left of her soul, whispered that she wanted to play, but her concept of play was a macabre distortion of childhood innocence. Arthur, in a moment of desperation, picked up the doll and began to recite a prayer he had learned in his studies. The doll began to writhe, and Amelia screamed in agony as her figure slowly faded away. Finally, Arthur decided to bury the doll in an old church, hoping that the sacred ground would contain the curse. He dug a deep grave in the churchyard, and as he placed the doll in the earth, he heard a final sigh of relief. As he covered the doll, he felt a great weight lifted from his shoulders. With all the cursed objects destroyed or sealed, Arthur expected the nightmares and manifestations to stop. However, he soon realized that he was being watched. An evil presence continued to haunt the museum, and he began to suspect that there was something deeper and darker behind the artifact. He began to examine the museum's records and discovered a series of old, nearly forgotten entries about a shadow curator, a title given to a mysterious figure who, from time to time, took on the role of guardian of cursed objects. This curator was tasked with keeping the souls bound to the artifacts, ensuring that they could never cause further harm. But something had gone wrong, and the objects had escaped his control. Arthur realized that he had been chosen as the new Shadow Curator, and that his task was not only to protect the artifacts, but also to confront the entity that controlled them. He was trapped in a cycle, destined to repeat the history of his predecessors, unless he could find a way to break the cycle once and for all. Determining that he must face the entity directly, Arthur prepared himself for the final confrontation. He returned to the now deserted museum with only the shadows for company. In the heart of the museum, in the main hall, he encountered a hooded figure, seemingly made of pure darkness. The figure revealed itself to be the embodiment of the artifact's curses, an entity created by the desires and hatred of those who had suffered injustice. It had chosen Arthur as the next curator, knowing that he was the only one capable of fighting the curses. But at the same time, it was he who would continue the cycle. Arthur, knowing that he could not win by force, used the knowledge he had gained of the curses. He began to recite ancient prayers and spells of protection, calling upon the souls of the victims he had freed. The voices of Helena, Morgana, and Amelia echoed through the hall, challenging the entity. The entity tried to resist. The souls weakened it, and Arthur seized the moment to cast the final spell. With a scream, the shadowy figure was consumed by an intense light, and the museum shook as if time itself were unraveling. When the light faded, Arthur stood alone in the hall, exhausted but victorious. He felt that the curses had finally been broken, and the souls of the cursed were at peace. However, he knew that the price had been high. He was now part of the museum, the last Shadow Curator, destined to protect the place and ensure that no new curses would arise. The Museum of Souls, now silent, stood as a monument to the tragedies of the past and the souls that had found rest. And Arthur, the curator, who had faced the dark legacy of the cursed artifacts, had become the last line of defense against the forces that no one else would dare face.